Hey guys, Zibboyeye or just Zib is fine, and today we're looking at an early found footage film that remains one of a kind to this day. In this video, we'll look at the too often overlooked The Last Broadcast. In 1996, inspired by new digital means of filmmaking such as PC editing, Lance Weiler and Stefan Avalos were itching to make a movie for cheap. And I mean cheap. Their film would cost a mere $900. Yeah, not even four figures. But that's fine because the scale complemented their budget. The duo planned a documentary-structured narrative centered around a group of people who venture into the woods in search of an urban myth, leaving only their footage to indicate their fate. Yeah, that does sound kinda similar to that other movie, but more on that later. Production went relatively smoothly. The biggest issues arose in post from those sluggish 90s desktops. But eventually the duo had their film. Well, actually that was the problem. They had their film, but they didn't actually have film, which the vast majority of projectors played at the time. Shockingly, in the face of distributors offering to convert their digital file to celluloid for the big screen, Avalos and Weiler chose to remain independent.
We've made this movie for no money. We were happy with it. We had a good time with it. Why don't we see what we can do with releasing it on our own terms?
With help from others in the business, the team organized a theatrical release in 1998, beamed via satellite. By the end of its run from the stars, The Last Broadcast made $12,000. Not a bad kickback from its humble investment. But not as great as another indie surprise. The following year in 1999, the Blair Witch Project shook the box office. But it didn't take long for viewers to note the similarities between it and The Last Broadcast. One article titled, "Which is Which?" did so just 2 days after premiere. But the real witching hour began in the wake of August 3rd when the New York Post compared the two productions. Afterwards, some media outlets decried the Blair Witch a ripoff. A completely false notion. The men behind the Blair Witch Project, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, conceptualized their work in 1993. Weiler and Avalos proposed their piece in 96. Nevertheless, Avalos believes, even as of a 2022 featurette, that his work stirred the witch's brew. The man suggests that Myrick and Sanchez saw the documentary form of The Last Broadcast and decided to pursue found footage instead. He posits that this occurred when broadcast screened near Sanchez and Myrick's office in June 1998. I'll try to be brief in disproving this theory. The Blair Witch was originally intended to take the form of a documentary featuring fake interviews, press conferences, and such. Some of this was still produced following the end of June of '98, but cash ran dry. This is likely what pushed the team to rely on a bird in the hand, the found footage they filmed first. This is amidst the disparaging feedback test audiences gave on the style. Even had they seen The Last Broadcast, I doubt Sanchez and Myrick would go against their own plan to make something test viewers detested because of it. The Blair Witch's found footage resulted from a lack of resources rather than espionage movie-going. That being said, in a 1999 article, Avalos concedes that the filmmakers may have just shared the same inspiration, and in fact, they did.
Started talking about the horror films that scared us when we were little kids, and we also had these other films that were kind of weird, where we loved that show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, Legend of Boggy Creek and Cherry of the Gods.
Well, I remember we were really intrigued by the whole sort of 1970s, very heavy-handed documentaries like, The Search for Bigfoot type deal.
But as independently as both were produced, the breakout hit still impacted the $900 flick. Initially, Weiler envied The Witch's winnings. It rips your gut out. You write a great story, it takes a lot of time and effort. Along comes this other one that's heralded as being so innovative, so creative, so original. That being said, sitting in the shadow of the Blair Witch wasn't so bad, as being in the mere vicinity of the hottest movie of the summer got eyes from retailers and consumers. I mean, that's pretty much how I heard of the movie. Regardless, the film stands on its own, and let's see how. It's time to trek into the woods and look at The Last Broadcast. In 1995, a public access show titled Fact or Fiction declines in viewership. At the recommendation of an online fan, the hosts Locus Wheeler and Steven Avcast venture into the Pine Barrens in search of the Jersey Devil for a special live broadcast. They bring along Jim Seward, a self-proclaimed psychic who offered to guide the hosts to the creature. However, when Jim is the only one to leave the woods alive, he becomes the prime suspect and convicted for the crew's murders. Now 2 years later, Jim dies in prison, providing filmmaker David Lay impetus to produce this documentary in hopes to expose the truth behind the Jersey Devil killings. The premise hooked me. Footage is so tantalizing and a mystery. It's as close as one can get to the crime scene chronologically. Not to mention the show Fact or Fiction got my attention too. This kitschy little program with its star-set hosts laid on the charm. Yeah, just look at those effects. It makes me wish I could watch some episodes for myself. Really gives off that authentic public access vibe. As comes with the genre, the direction must also give verisimilitude to the performance. We've seen how other productions achieve this before. Rec provided actors only what his or her character does. The Blair Witch cast employed an extended method acting technique. In these works, improvisation is key, and the last broadcast is no exception, producing some human moments in the process. Distinguishing this film, though, is that the actors knew how a scene begins and ends. But the path from point A to point B, they played by ear. You know, I love doing this show and seeing the various means these movies use to reach the same goal. Speaking of actors, documentarian David Lay is played by David Beard, whose performance takes the cake.
I'd come to this project with many of the same assumptions that you have concerning the Jersey Devil murders and the guilt of Jim Seward.
Beard provides a bassy, matter-of-fact voice that, combined with his analytical dialogue, kept me hanging on every word. His presence is a special product of the form the movie takes. Telling fiction through documentary is a rarity. Although one of my favorite horror movies, Noroi the Curse, is structured in such a way. For that matter, its filmmaker, Koji Shiraishi, is known for that style. And I have to wonder, if the Blair Witch Project ended up being a documentary as intended, would mockumentary eclipse the found footage genre as we know it? Point being, the style has legs in the world of horror. But does the last broadcast achieve that tension? The scarce yet bloody images of the incident are made more gruesome with the crime scene analysis. In addition, there's the killer. If human, they're a culprit with brains.
It is as though the real killer planned a media event so amazingly cunning that it could be thought of as scripted.
And brawn.
What could have killed 3 healthy men?
The shadowy image of the murderer gradually comes into view, and it's quite intimidating. That's not even mentioning the music, which plays a part in the building, eerie air. Admittedly, the horror is more of a tone backing the mystery. Returning to music, there's this montage I love that recaps the case, and the rock and vocals kick in and it's just great. In fact, I got into the docu-style as a whole. Giving overt questions and facts, it's like direct stimulation. It had me pondering the truth. A topic that brings me to the theme. The last broadcast is driven by the elusive nature of truth. For one, truth is not solid, it shifts shape over time. For example, David receives the lost tape from the infamous broadcast. The recording shows the incident of the murder at a time when Jim was in a net chat room. Jim's guilt, which was once truth, is swiftly proven lie. Yet, even those who had faith in Jim began to believe that lie.
Because of the media, how one-sided the whole thing is, and you start to think, maybe he did do it. Maybe there was a side of Jim that was capable of such an atrocity.
But if the press had leaned a certain way, one would assume it's the truth on a case like this. The video evidence, even before recovering the lost tapes, should paint enough of a picture. The camera is not biased, the footage should be objective, right? Not necessarily. While Locus relies on Jim as a guide, he doesn't regard the psychic too highly.
Jim's one psycho motherfucker. Scary.
Although one would not be able to tell from the rest of the footage that was meant to be broadcast. There are things people hide from the lens. Then there's the ambivalence of footage. A key point in the tape occurs early in the crew's search.
Are you a psychic or a psycho?
Look, man. I'll see you back at camp, man.
The shove, as it's called. This moment can be viewed in two ways. Either Jim was offended, he's making an honest effort and just wants the respect of the team, or the assault reflects a violent temperament. Facts can be used to different ends. A tactic the prosecution was acutely aware of. Typically, the law should uncover the reality behind a case. However, due to the election year, the state sought an easy conviction. Thus the employment of Claire DeForest, who after became known as the Killer Cutter. The prosecution tasked him with splicing an incriminating reel to convince a jury of Jim's guilt. Under the context of the killer cut, you could probably guess how jurors viewed the shove. Here, film becomes a powerful tool in moving its viewers. Then the media, now with the story of the year, echoes Jim's guilt. As the killer cut had, this convinces its audience too. So in front of the camera, after the camera, after the camera, everyone was manipulating the truth. Which brings us to David's documentary.
The acquiring of mysterious videotape has changed the mood behind the making of this documentary. Gone is the attempt at pure objectivity with which we started.
Once again, film acts as a tool to influence viewers and affect the truth. The Killer Cutter even points out the subjectivity of David's assessment.
I mean, what is the truth? With a documentary film, I mean, ultimately it's what the filmmaker perceives as the truth. That's what you're trying to do, right?
At this point, I'm reminded of an ethics class I took. I just finished my degree, of course I'm gonna look back on my college classes. Once we discussed the reality of reality. We know truth exists because we bear witness to its effects. The murders did happen, that's truth with a capital T. But what people make of it becomes truth with a little baby t. While the big truth exists, people, the law, the press, mold it as its sculptor sees fit, even for the sake of an underlying agenda. The last broadcast holds a scrutinous eye against the media and takes an axe to its very notion of objectivity. So who is the Jersey Devil? Is it man? Monster? Or is it this party animal from the Blu-ray's inner cover art? I'm not spoiling anything, this guy doesn't really show up, I just thought it was funny. Well, spoilers until this time. I talk about the ending that long? Well, anyways, let's get to it. David passes the previously lost footage on to Michelle Monarch, a data retrieval expert who hopes to exhume from this mangled frame the killer's face. Just as it's revealed, Monarch is suffocated by the culprit. David Lay? Are you sure it's not the winghead guy? This is my second time watching the movie and this twist still confuses me. David lured the Fact or Fiction crew into his hands. It makes sense that he would play Monarch the same way. To clarify, David really acquired the lost footage, having snatched it off his victims. All he had to do was give Monarch the tape, bait her with his ploy, and wait for his catch. He need not actually produce a documentary. It begs the question why. Releasing it could place him as the last person seen by his latest prey. So I guess it could be a personal shrine to his own ego, but even then it's a considerable effort for that purpose. Now, I like the Jersey David. Okay, that sounds stupid. What I mean is I like him as the killer. His demeanor I once saw as calm and clinical now exudes a cold callousness. And despite my qualm, I even appreciate the ambiguity enshrouding David's motive. Facts and details have been spoon-fed to the audience, until the climax when we're left to fend for ourselves. The viewer may cobble up an explanation from their own analysis, or perhaps the truth is forever out of reach. Regardless, forcing the viewer into a self-sufficient position underpins the grand message, which should become clear after discussing the narrative's transformation. Once David corners Monarch, the diegetic camera perspective is exchanged for an omniscient view, i.e. a standard film. The filmmakers wanted to trick people into believing this was a real documentary, so I imagine this twist blew people's minds. For me, I knew it was fictitious, but I watched it as a found footage fan. At first I was confused, protesting its break in perspective, but quickly I fell in love with it. David's documentary presented in 4:3 when he had the power to constrain the narrative. Now that aspect ratio expands. Not only that, but the celluloid mimicking image is sharper. In other words, we see the big, clear picture. On top of the imagery, the scene reinforces a main idea. The voice of the documentary literally buries the truth. A scathing critique of agenda-oriented media. It's at this point I have to rewind and notice life imitating art. Recall the fiasco surrounding the last broadcast and the Blair Witch. At the time, E! Entertainment commented on the ripoff speculation, saying, "No lawsuits have been filed yet." That's kind of odd, isn't that like reporting, "Guy didn't say bless you to nearby sneeze, legal action yet to be taken"? Even entertaining the idea of litigation insinuates there was a case to be made. Witch and Broadcast are just two movies with vaguely similar premises. Take that to court. That's the fact of it. But the fiction, movie-making millions stole idea, is far more tantalizing. It's tragic, humorous, and appropriate that Weiler and Avalos fell subject to the same sensationalized media they criticized. Let's cut back to the ending though. I addressed the doc, the film, now let's look at their collision in the shift. Maybe it was a result of the Blair Witch, but as I watched the docu-segment, I half expected some supernatural twist like the actual Jersey Devil to round the corner. It's not unlike documentaries on urban legends or cryptids that open your mind to what may be out there, even if you would find it absurd in a casual context. By the end though, it's as real as it gets, people killing people. And I find it funny that the film transitions to this reality via this hokey shot. Yeah, David just Dragon Ball Z's behind her. I love this though. The irony that the narrative delivers the real story after the fakest shot in the movie, and then becomes an actual movie, it's great. This switcheroo serves as the crux of the last broadcast's assessment of human nature. When it's a documentary, it looks real, but its pretense lies. When it's a film, it looks fake, but it tells the truth. By interchanging fact and fiction with their respective filmic structure, the last broadcast reveals medium is arbitrary in our eyes. In the context of the work, David may be the host, but I almost saw him in the detective role of a whodunit. Extra-textually, I've exhibited a similar mindset in writing my videos. Last year, I did a review on Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2. It has my favorite and longest behind-the-scenes coverage I've done thus far. The director was an underdog in narrative cinema, ambitious. He faced a meddling studio and greedy execs, easy antagonists. It made for a great story. It's just as true as any of my other making of looks, but it made for better drama. My favorite true stories are ones that can be interpreted like a narrative. You probably relate. We digest reality and fiction the same way. Recall the Blair Witch versus Last Broadcast media stint. Why would journalists frame the freak coincidence as idea theft? Well, when it comes to marketing the truth, what's more profitable? Selling the plain facts or a good story? What's going to grab your attention? It's easy to become blind to the salesman behind that voice on TV. I think of this line David utters regarding the acquired footage.
Going to the authorities with this new tape is pondered, but rejected. To them the case is closed, and with Jim's death, appeals are a moot point.
On first viewing, I was like, yeah, seems legit. But on a second watch, I was going, of course, anyone else would report this to the police, but David wouldn't because it would land him in chains. I had questioned the authority of the narrator after I had already known of his deception. But realistically, the man behind the curtain isn't going to let you in on when he's playing you. The ability to trick the public. It doesn't help that the tools of the trade have become more convincing. Within the production of the movie, the autopsy images were edited using Photoshop, the hottest tech of the time. Fun in the hands of creatives, harmful in those of manipulators. Now we face the latest weapon in deception, AI. The rise of the deepfake poses a danger to the information era. And as a result, the lesson the last broadcast teaches becomes more relevant. Earlier we discussed how the widely held truth manifested through law, then journalism. But the last step in the process to discover truth lies in audience. By pulling the rug out from under the viewer, the last broadcast demonstrates the ease at which media can manipulate. In doing so, the movie teaches consumer independence. It's up to the audience to evaluate the voice of the filmmaker and judge truth for themselves.
As they said on Fact or Fiction, you decide.
You said it, killer. That was The Last Broadcast, a film that is vastly more than meets the eye. The mystery gripped me throughout, helped in part by the unique documentary structure. The malleability of truth that drove the film kept me thinking long after the credits. But just before it winds down, all its ideas culminate in a clever, witty final lambast of modern journalism that encourages critical thinking. The movie excelled beyond the mere early found footage I went in expecting. While it may not offer much of a horror experience, the intelligent message that has only become more poignant now easily makes it worth a watch. I've been Zibboyeye, or just Zib is fine, and thank you for watching. Zibbo, bye bye!